Welcome to Mornington Peninsula Shire's Dying to Know Day. First up, we have Helen Callanan. Helen is a practicing end-of-life doula and the founder, managing director and lead educator of Preparing the Way. Originally trained in traditional Chinese medicine and Reiki, Helen has almost 40 years' experience working with ageing, very ill and dying people. Preparing the Way delivers holistic end-of-life and doula education across Australia and New Zealand. Preparing the Way is also very proud to have designed and delivered the world's first nationally recognised accredited training certificate in end-of-life doula services. Helen, if you'd like to come to the stage.
Hi everybody, it's so great to be here and what a wonderful turnout. This is so great. And thank you, Antonella, for opening our day today with such heart, because that's what today is all about. So this is just really a great observation. I think, we acknowledged our traditional owners and our Indigenous elders, and I want to really acknowledge the elder in you, no matter your age. Because what I know is you've taken time out of your day to come here and dig around in the topic of death and dying. And most people run from this conversation. So I want to really acknowledge the elder in you. And I also want to acknowledge the elder that death is. If we're willing, death can be, and dying and aging and grieving can be some of our greatest teachers and bring some of our most heartfelt moments and experiences. And that's certainly the privilege of what I get to see in the work that I do as an end-of-life doula, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later. Here in the West, we often live like it's life versus death. Like death is this thing that we have to keep at bay and we can't talk about it because it might happen. And that, think about the multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry. Aging, dying and death are things to be like, don't talk about it, let's keep it at bay. But let's think about it. Consider that death isn't the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. Birth and death are both parts of a full life. So the focus here, I believe, in death should be on our lives. Yes, death is there, but think about it. Death is one breath that we exhale. But there's a whole lot of living that comes up to that. And again, I'll share more about that shortly. Back only like 100 years ago, we took care of our aging, our dying, and our dead at home. When someone was aging, the family moved in around them. And then when someone was dying or had died, often the local ladies came and they bathed and dressed the body and anointed the body and they made food for everybody, and the men were building the coffin and digging the hole, and then they would take them down and bury them. That was sort of the way it was done. But then about 100 years ago, it's like we outsourced our aging, our death and our dying. We sent our aging to aged care facilities. We sent our dying to hospital or hospice or wherever. We sent our dead to funeral directors. And our grieving, they sort of had to fend for themselves. So that was only 100 years ago. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong that we outsourced it. Welcome to progress, you could call it. However, there was a cost. And the cost is that we lost, as individuals, as families, as community, we lost our capacity to care for and to be confident and competent in taking care of our aging, our dying and our dead and our grieving. And so that to me is a great cost that we have. And if you think about it, with the actual stats of baby boomers. Okay, who here's a baby boomer? Born between 46 and 64. Hands up, come on. Everyone, oh no, there's more, I know. Well, do you know what? I'm one of them too, right? And the stats are really quite extraordinary. We are the biggest demographic, particularly in Australia right now. The number of people over 65 is going to double by 2030, and then double again by 2050. So any of you that are younger than a baby boomer, we are going to become your problem. Reality check, right? And therefore, think about it. There's already insufficient aged care beds. There's already insufficient palliative beds, hospice beds, care. Do you know, already insufficient. The people that are doing those roles are doing everything they can and working so much to make life better for everybody. But there's just not enough infrastructure from a government perspective, from a national perspective, to be dealt with. So therefore, what do we do now? If you think about it, death has to come back into our homes. It has to. We have to grow our own skills and our own care and our community's care to care for the people in our communities, in our streets, in our homes, in our families, in our groups. And now there's a model started up called Compassionate Communities Australia. And that's just ramped up again, which is very exciting. And it's about empowering communities to take care of their own. And I think that's something that I'll better get some information to Councillor about, I think, that model. So we're given those statistics. There's so many supports out there in community. Aged care, you'll hear about them today, hospice in the home, all sorts of things. And council things that come to our home. But they're already overloaded and they're already struggling. So how do we as individuals and families and people and communities, how do we get our needs met? How do we address this issue? Professor Alan Keller here, who is a world-renowned sociologist, has distinguished in palliative care, author, all of that. He shared some statistics and he says that only 5%, so 5% of the time, a person is advancing in age, living with an illness, dying or grieving, only 5% of the time are they in front of a doctor or a nurse. 95% of the time, 95% of the time, they're either alone, with family, friends, neighbours, community, the dog, beautiful dogs here today, or the TV or the internet. And they're facts. So public health as a conventional care model, which is essential. We can't live and die without it. We need it. But we're in front of them 5% of the time. So what happens in the 95%? Who's got our back then? Does that make sense? It's really about, there's a big gap. So the other thing is about knowing what are your choices? What are your rights? You know, for example, did you know that in Victoria you don't have to have a coffin? You don't? Did you know that? Did you know that in Victoria you can have a shrouded cremation or a shrouded natural burial in a beautiful natural burial ground under the trees, not be in the little cement blocks? Did you know that? Did you know that in Tasmania now you're able to have a water cremation? Cremation is generally fire, and you can be taken over when you're deceased, your body can be taken over to Tasmania and water cremated now. That's a new thing that's happened. Do you get what I'm saying? There's so many options out there, but how can you make an informed choice if you don't know what your options are? So, death isn't a medical event. Death is a deeply personal, family, individual, and often spiritual event for people. Even when there's grief. Death's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. But often, so often, when there is enough care provision and we've got the services of palliative care and we've got the right medical support, but also we've got family and we've got people around us, that it can be very gentle and peaceful and graceful. Doesn't mean it's not sad. We will grieve. Yeah? So, as Catherine said when she introduced me, I'm an end-of-life doula. So a lot of people haven't heard of that term. So doula is a Greek word and basically means person of service. So as a doula, I'm non-medical and non-clinical. So I don't do nursing or all of that, although some doulas do have that qualification, but I don't. But what we do as doulas is we provide emotional support, physical, practical support, spiritual support. We can provide resources, link people up to resources that are out there. We provide education. You know, I don't know about you, but when I know about something and I understand it, I'm not as afraid of it. So we talk about what it's like for people to die. We have those conversations. We show videos and we give you information and help people understand what they're dealing with and your choices so that you can really step into this life experience, because death is another life experience. You know, think about it. We plan for our births, we plan for our holidays, we plan for our retirement. We plan lots of things, but we don't plan for the one and only thing that's guaranteed, people. You know, so I'm always big about the planning and getting that done, having those conversations, and why Dying to Know Day is such a critical day. And I've been participating in this now for many, many years, and I love this opportunity to be able to come here and share with you. So I've got one slide, if that could be shown now, please. Is that Trevor doing that? Who's doing that? No, that's you. Oh, I'm doing that. Oh, do I just go forward arrow? Okay, that's me. There we go. So I wanted to spend a little moment talking about where and how a doula works. So you'll notice down the bottom, Natural Grace, they're holistic funeral directors that are based in Woodend and Melbourne and Warrnambool, and soon to open in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales, and soon to make a move down here, I believe, which is very exciting. We work very closely with them. They're a major part of our training. So they've created this model, and we work inside this. So I want to talk to you about, as it says on the left there, end-of-life doulas provide authentic continuity of care. And I want to explain that to you. So let's talk about a full life. The circle of life is those 10 stages. So we're living well. But you know what, you might want to do some planning. You might be going overseas, or you might have aging parents or someone in your life that you want to help get their plans done, right? So we work with people in that stage, just when they're planning. But then maybe a diagnosis or illness or aging enters the picture. We work with people there. Then they might be living with their life-limiting or terminal illness. Maybe they're having treatment. We work with people there. But then the treatment may not work anymore. So they go into palliative care. We still continue to work with people there through the active dying stage. And the active dying stage is a recognised set of signs and symptoms when a person is very close to the end of their life. We're working with people in that situation. And then a person dies. But then we continue working with the people, which is after death care, vigil and ceremony. You can keep your person at home and care for them at home if that's what you want to do. We help you do that. We help you keep the body safe so that your person doesn't have to go into the care of someone that doesn't know them, right? We can help you do that. Then we can help you through the funeral, memorial, celebration of life stage. Then we help the body get returned to the elements in a safe way. And then we still can continue working with the people that are left behind when their person has died and help them navigate this new normal for them. So as an end-of-life doula, it's the only role I know of that can actually work with someone and accompany a person or a family or a community or a group throughout all of those 10 stages. Because every other stage drops off. We might have a diagnostic team. Well, they drop off once we've got a diagnosis. Then we might have a treatment team. They drop off once we go into palliative care. Then we've got palliative care, who we can't do our work without. They look after us through palliative care and active dying, but then we die. They drop off. Do you get how I'm seeing that there's no continuity there for families? So we help bridge that gap. So it's all about you. This is all about you. And it's about your people and who's close to you and who you care about. It's all about you're the expert in your life. You know what's important to you. You know what your values and preferences are. Our job as end-of-life doulas is to help you reach those and attain those. You know, what's right for you is what you know, but you've got to have information to know what your options are, and that's a big part of this. Your voice can and should be heard and should be honoured. And so that's why do your planning, have your conversations with the important people in your life, document, share your plans, talk about it. We don't need to normalise death because there's nothing more normal. We need to socialise it. And that's what Dying to Know Day is all about, is about socialising it. So I just want to finish with a little something. You know, just like you can't get pregnant by talking about it, you've got to do something else to get pregnant, you know what I'm saying? You can't die by talking about it. Otherwise, I would have been dead decades ago. So thank you so much for your time. I really hope that this has been informative to you. We've got some resources up the back for you. And thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I love the fact that we're to normalise death, not to normalise death, but socialise it. I really like that idea of socialising it. Now you'll have an opportunity to ask Helen any questions, as well as all of our other guest speakers at the end when we do our Q&A, when we all sit up on the stage. However, in the meantime, it's now a time to introduce Inga McGinn. Inga is a senior counsellor worker with the Peninsula Home Hospice, working alongside specialist palliative care nursing, palliative care physicians and trained volunteers in community palliative care. Inga has worked in palliative care for 25 years, working with children, teenagers, young adults and older people. The roles have included clinical supervisor, manager, clinical family therapist and bereavement counsellor. Inga is passionate about supporting clients, carers and their families to achieve all that is important for them, finding meaning, making choices and promoting quality life, as well as navigating the world of loss. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you all for attending. I think it is about that conversation, and it's often a conversation that people don't want to have, but welcome and thank you for joining us. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that not all deaths involved are palliative care. You can put first slide up. Thank you. Not all deaths are involved in palliative care. Some deaths are planned, some deaths are not expected, and some deaths are traumatic. But today I've been asked to focus on palliative care and talk a bit about Peninsula Home Hospice, which is the local community palliative care service in this area. Palliare and hospice, it means to cloak, and hospice, like hospitality, to serve. And the principle of palliative care is the easing of suffering, to cloak the pain, be that physical, emotional, spiritual pain. Pain is so much more than the physical pain. Even though one of the biggest fears is I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be in physical pain, but pain extends much broader than that. Palliative care is not about hastening death. It's not about prolonging life. It's about facing the life we have left and ensuring that it's of the quality we want. It's also about the people we leave, the legacy we leave, and the memories we leave. 25, 30 years ago, I got my first job in palliative care. I didn't know how I would respond to that. I was working with dying children and teenagers and their families on the peninsula, and I didn't know, how am I going to sit with this? So part of my, look, I better get used to this feeling, is I started wandering cemeteries and reading tombstones and pondering death. And I found the grave of a child who had died in 1936. Not uncommon for that era. Later I found a grave under a grown over tree, and that child had died in 1938. They were siblings. Again, not uncommon for that era. What was uncommon was there were fresh flowers on the grave. That means 65 years later, someone was still visiting those graves. If the parents were in their late teens, it means they would have been in their 80s when I found the graves. My pondering was, who bought those flowers? I assume it was the parents. If it wasn't the parents, maybe they handed the mantle over to siblings. But either way, their story, their memories, their relationship, their bond had been continuing for a long, long time. In palliative care and at Peninsula Home Hospice, we step in for a moment in time. It may be days, it may be months, but there's a story long before us, and there will be a story long after us. So how can we respect the story before, support the story during, and hold what is meaningful for all the people involved? I know we've succeeded, not when we're told how great we are, what a wonderful job. I've heard, you are angels. That isn't what success is about. Success is when I hear, this is just how we wanted it. We cared and gave more than we thought we could give. I never thought we could do it, but we did. When I hear stories or reflections on the time that was made up of pride, of comfort, of love, and of growth. What makes a good death? Okay. And Helen, and all through the day, people will be referring to choice. And it's about choice, and it's about not suffering. It's about choosing where to be cared for, where to die, who should know, who should be present. What that looks like is different for every person. Be it at home, in hospital, in a hospice, in a van watching the sunrise. Be it alone, be it with family, be it with friends, be it with pets, and dogs are a bit of a theme today too, I can see. There may be health professionals, but dying is normal. It's so much more than a medical event or a health issue. Again, a theme that Helen has brought out this morning. It is deeply personal. It is deeply intimate. And for most I have met, it's about choice, about dignity, and about having suffering relieved. And that includes all types of suffering. Number 3. So palliative care helps people live as fully as possible and as comfortably as possible with a life-limiting illness. So I haven't died before. Most of the people I meet haven't died before. So there are lots of new decisions, new choices, new experiences, and even along the way, we can change our mind lots of times through that. Our aim is, of palliative care, the aim is to work with the ill person and who they choose as their support to live as fully as possible and as comfortable as possible. To partner in care with you and your family and the people that are important. From a practical point of view, anyone can refer. It can be a health professional, it can be family, it can be friends, it can even be yourself. We're a free service and we're accessible 24/7. And as in the introduction, there's specialist palliative care nurses, physicians, counsellors, people to help navigate the services, music therapy, volunteers, and I have noticed a number in the audience today, so thank you for your support. And we also have access to speech therapy, OT, physio, and dietitians. We also work closely with the person's GP and specialist. After death, we continue support with counselling, education, groups, and that just to we don't disappear, we are around, but not forever. During a person's time with us, they may have moved between hospital, home, holidays, hospice, residential aged care facilities, but we continue our involvement. But we start where the needs are identified. It could be getting a physical symptom better managed, It could be, how do I plan? Wills, funerals, power of attorney. It could be, how do I tell people? How do I tell my children? It could be leaving a legacy or writing a life story. It could be getting more support in the home. It is about living fully, even when you are dying. And for carers, it could be a break. I want to make special mention of, and I need my hands for this, carers. And the reason I use this is that I don't want to minimise or diminish the story of that relationship by a label of carer, or relegate people who care to a role. Carers are made up of lovers, husbands, wives, grandson, grandfather, mother, daughter, uncle, niece, lifelong friends and neighbours. And the rights of carers need to be considered as much as the person that's dying. To be respected, to be listened to. You know the person better than we will ever know them. The right to education, the right to support, and most of all, the right to complain. I also want to make mention of vulnerability. The biggest fears I hear are being a burden, a physical burden, and physical pain. The other is being taken advantage of. Be that handing over an inheritance earlier than what you had hoped. Be that being scammed. Be that being pressured to make decisions that are not in your best interest. One of the greatest things we can do as a community is offering a place to die safely. Every person here has an opportunity to transform the life of another in our community who is dying or grieving. Even the pets who comfort the bereaved afterwards. It is a personal, intimate issue. It's a family issue. It's a community issue. It's a social issue. It's a healthcare issue. It's a political issue. And it's a fiscal issue. But what it demands from us as a community is compassion and empathy, respect, and courage to talk about and listen to stories and sit with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. That was really, really beautiful and some lovely words to finish off. Thank you very much. Now we have Liz Stillwell. Liz's life has always been in health and wellness. Originally training in New Zealand as an occupational therapist, she moved to clinical hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming. Arriving in Melbourne in 2010, she was initially a counselling therapist, cancer group leader and meditation teacher at the Gawler Cancer Foundation. Currently, Liz facilitates residential cancer retreats in the Yarra Valley, conducts hypnotherapy counselling sessions and leads meditation groups and is a spiritual carer in palliative care. Liz will be our final speaker to conclude the speakers for today.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. And I want to say thank you, Antonella, for your wonderful welcome this morning. I feel a bit emotional now, actually, just thinking about it, but I'll speak up a wee bit. That's better? I lead cancer retreats, and I lead a lot about spirituality, end of life, emotions, and I promise that people that I will give them live demonstrations throughout the live emotions. Because when we talk about big topics, it's pretty natural that we get, risings of emotion. So my work here now is to talk about bereavement, and I've got some notes, but I actually want to move to some of the things I thought of this morning, more about coming to a peaceful place of comfort around loss. So what we know, or what we find out the hard way often, is that life runs to its own plan. It doesn't run to our plan. We try and control things. We can control, how the watering system in the garden. We can control whether we apply for a job or not. We can choose to sell a house. But life has its own kind of, excuse the daggy glasses, mine just broke. Life has its own kind of backdrop plan in which things just happen. And they often happen out of the blue. They happen quickly or they happen slowly. And as humans, we find out the hard way how to deal with these things. So, in a sense, life and loss are inextricably entwined. And I read this morning just a little saying that grief is a protest at separation. And I could really relate to that. I've lost quite a few people in my life, and I still have strong relationships with them, which is something I'll come to at the end. But the moment of death is typically a shock. Now, I work in palliative care. I have done for 9 years in a city hospital, and I work at the bedside of the dying. I often am there present at the moment of death, and I often will bless a body or do some prayer. I'm spiritual rather than religious in that context. But what my experience is that death still comes as a shock. Even when people are sitting watching the chest rise and fall, death still comes as a shock when the final breath is taken. So, and I used to think that the circumstances of the death itself actually determined how the process of grief and bereavement went. And I still think that has impact. Sometimes I know, I work with a lot of families that have been absent at the time of death, not because they intended to, they just ducked out of the room, or they went to get a coffee or have a wee, or they didn't stay overnight. And they missed that final moment as if that was important. And we know a large number of people die alone. And I wonder whether there's almost like a conscious choice on the part of the dying to slip away in that moment. I also work a lot naturally with people that are strongly religious, and my role is to support their religion. But as we know, when it comes to death, faith is not an insurance policy. You can be the most robust, Catholic or Anglican or, or whatever faith. It's actually immaterial. Death comes, and it's not an insurance policy against things happening. So learning how to navigate our life is really learning how to navigate this process. We know, in fact, the research tells us that people handle bereavement through love and connection. And one of the issues can be, obviously, isolation, that if a significant family member dies, be it a spouse or a parent or I work with a lot of people where an adult is living with their mother or father. So the adult child might be in their 40s or 50s or 60s or even 70s, but they're still living with their parent. So when that parent dies, that's a massive loss. It's like an earthquake within a family. And we know also, of course, that grief is cumulative. That when we experience a loss, I know as a hypnotherapist, this is one of my favourite topics, that often when we experience a loss, at some level it's reminding us of other losses that we've been through. And I know for a fact that while the mind, the subconscious, will kind of file things in order of, what's the word? The order in which they happened? Chronological order. It's always helpful to have a support team, one's left. So events are filed chronologically, but they're also filed according to the emotion that they share. So if there's a common thread of loss in our lives, and let's face it, some people have had more loss than others. If there's a common thread of loss and we experience another loss, it's like a fishing long line. The subconscious mind, not necessarily the conscious, will bring up old events that have to do with that same feeling of loss. And that can result in complicated grief or complex grief, which can be That can also be linked with trauma, when a death has been traumatic and sudden. Yeah, I could talk about that more, but that's quite a big topic, and we have got our Q&A as well. But just being aware that that often we're dealing with old losses or old grief that may be unresolved. So in terms of talking about bereavement, my aim is really to talk about also how we resolve it. It's deeply stressful. It's very individual. It's a landmark event in our lives when we lose someone close to us, and it will continue to be a reference point. You know, when you tell a story and you refer back to before my father died or before my husband died, it becomes a landmark event in our lives. So we know that grief at loss is very normal and it's not a problem to be fixed. And we do know, as I said, that love and connection are the most effective ways of working with grief. So in terms of types of grief, we have anticipatory grief, which is often felt when we're facing our own death, when we're dealing with a diagnosis, but also by, for example, a spouse who's watching their partner or husband or wife decline steadily. I work a lot with people with specific neurological illnesses such as motor neurone disease, etc. And anticipatory grief can be happening at every stage of every part of the illness. There are many other chronic illnesses, as we know. Normal grief, are normal feelings, reactions, behaviours that we expect after a loss. And I think fatigue is a really big one, actually. Fatigue and exhaustion can be enormous when we're going through bereavement. Muddled head. If you think of the symptoms of stress and how we feel when we're not thinking clearly, all of these things can be present beyond a death and a bereavement. Feelings of detachment. And I love listening to that, I've forgotten her name as well, Julia Samuel, the well-known British grief therapist. She says that grief is a small, very tidy word, but actually it's incredibly messy and chaotic. And I know from personal experience that that's a fact. We have chronic grief, which are normal grief reactions, but they don't diminish, so they continue for much longer periods of time than are generally accepted. And delayed grief, where emotional responses to loss are suppressed or postponed or clearly avoided. And I've seen this happen a lot when we have perhaps a young wife or young husband die, and the remaining spouse is left with family to look after, and life is bloody busy. Life is full on. Life was busy before somebody got ill or died, but it continues to be busy. And a lot of people find when they're initially grieving that first period of time after the funeral can be a very, very busy time, winding up affairs, winding up, I've been in a bereavement support role for some years at my hospital in the city for a certain period of time. And often when I make the initial call, people are feeling really stressed and strained by those bank accounts that need to be wound up. The teller on the end of the phone that doesn't recognise that somebody actually no longer exists. That they're not on holiday, they've actually died, and we now need to put the account into one name or whatever. And they find that experience can be incredibly stressful and demanding. And I often say, just take it one, like how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. It might be doing 2 or 3 things a week, but slowing down the pace of expectation of self, that it doesn't all have to be done in the first week. And disenfranchised or complicated grief. So often there can be grief when a relationship isn't openly sanctioned or we can't talk about it. I've had people come to me for counselling where the person they were having the affair with has died, or they're in a gay relationship and the family still don't accept the gay relationship, and grief is made much harder. And sometimes it just feels so damn awful that we want to avoid it, which again puts us on delay. And what I know as a therapist, I've been working. My surname and my business name don't actually fit around death and dying. It fits more around immortality, really, still well. But I have a lot of people that come to me that are struggling with one aspect of the bereavement. And if I could say, as a clinical hypnotherapist, I've been doing hypnosis for 30 years now. I still love it. It's wonderful. But if I had $1 for every person that rang me and said, could you hypnotise me to speed up the grief process? And sadly, the answer is no. And we know that. It has its own pace. So we need to normalise grief and say that all emotions are normal and natural. But, and Candace Pert, the late Dr. Candace Pert, who was a neurophysicist, said that we have over 100 different emotions. And for every one, there's a different neuropeptide or neurochemical that crosses the synaptic pathway through the brain and through the body. So what we know is whenever we're feeling emotional, we feel it everywhere. You can feel it in your big toe, even though you're not conscious of it. So we feel it throughout. And touching briefly on family dynamics, because family, illness is stressful enough. Death can be stressful. For some people, it's the end. The death can be the end of the stressful part, but it's a different sort of relationship that they might have than someone else who may have a deeper bond or love for that person. I've worked with people where the death has signified a release from a relationship, and there can be some relief with that. We assume that all relationships are happy and healthy. They're not. Life is complex, love is complex, grief is complex in that way. So often we see family dynamics, particularly in palliative care, really rising to the surface. So I suppose my message, just in closing, is that release of emotions is really important. We're designed as this moving organism. I made the mistake of doing a public speak and talking about the fact that this body is designed as a moving orgasm. Instantly. I can tell you now that instantly, I can tell you that instantly everyone in the room sat up. They were listening. So now I'm very careful how I say that word. We're designed as a moving organism. When you think of the respiratory system, the digestive system, every part of our body is designed to move. But if we don't like what we're feeling, we often just hold tight and box on. And we have all these expressions, don't we, about stiff upper lip and I'll get through it and soldier on. I use that expression a lot in the cancer retreats because soldiering on relates to just tightening the body. We don't want a tight body, and for some of you that want to loosen your body, I do a meditation and Qigong group down at Mount Martha Community House. A couple of you are here with me today. But a release of emotions is very important, but we all have our own emotional style. Some of us are private, some of us, like moi, are a wee bit more public, which is just fine. My life got better when I started becoming way more honest with myself and with others. So find a way of expressing your feelings, whether it's journaling, having a mentor, a counsellor, a network of friends, designated catch-ups with family or neighbours. Grief and isolation can be a real issue, especially if family are geographically widespread. And in New Zealand, being a smaller country, family can be from the top to the bottom. I used to think that everyone that was born in Melbourne stayed in Melbourne, but I know that's not the case. Family are very widespread, and that can pose issues of its own, though thank God for Zoom. Counselling needs can vary. I've worked a lot where one good, hearty, healthy session is enough for some people, and others will need ongoing support. But it's good to have a really positive, strong connection with your counsellor. Somebody that you feel you can sit down and, break bread with. I've even sat down, if it's been an afternoon, evening session, I've had a glass of wine with my client, cheese and a biscuit or a bowl of soup. There's something about being human. We're all human today, aren't we? Here. We're humans connecting with humans, and that's our role in terms of being here. So the other thing is just simply, research tells us that exercise makes a big difference. And moving the body can be a helpful way of moving the emotions. And I just say, basically, if you resist grief, life will move you on regardless. Life moves us on. And I know when my father and mother both died, My father died when I was 27 of a massive heart fibrillation, and I couldn't believe how normal the world continued on. How could this be when such a my mother was only 58, the first of her large community of friends to be a widow, and Dad was the first of a huge community of men to die, the very first. And I know that life does move on, and it will move us on if we try and hang on. I'm not Buddhist, but I think we can learn a lot from Buddhist teachings, and one of them being the nature of impermanence. So life is valuable and wonderful and incredible when we regard it as temporary. I used to think that I was immortal and everyone else died, but I know that's not the case. But I also know that if I was immortal, I'd be bored rigid. We're not meant to last forever. And this body will not last forever. So we give it a good go while we're here. But the other thing I think that's really important, and I remember saying it in my mother's eulogy at her funeral, she died of a sudden heart attack also, is that, physical life may finish, but love doesn't. Love is eternal, and we do carry people in our heart. And I have a list of people on my refrigerator that have passed on that are close to me, and I talk to them constantly. I think it's why I live on my own, even though I'm in a committed long-term relationship. But the other final aspect is use your spiritual faith. Use it to draw on to actually help you at times of the depth of the pain and the yearning. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
And